Hi, I'm Cody Anderson, one of the pastors at Parker United Methodist Church. We just wrapped up a sermon series on the book of Ruth, reflecting on the ways in which God provides for us. And we are transitioning into this new season, this season of Advent. But this week we are holding space for one of my favorite holidays, Thanksgiving. Now, perhaps it's one of my favorite because it centers around a table with all of these delicious foods that I am so excited to eat. Perhaps it's one of my favorites because it's the only holiday where we travel to go and be with family. And so being able to see my nieces and nephew is just such a joy for me. Or maybe it's because we all could use a little more gratitude in our life. There's this beautiful book called 1,000 Gifts by Anne Voskamp. I reflect on this book a lot. I mention it a lot because it has so many amazing things to help us remember to be grateful, how to be grateful, even in those hard times in which we feel like God doesn't answer our prayers the way that we want. God doesn't answer us or see us the way that we feel like God should see us. And so in this book, she talks a lot about how to be grateful for the little things. She talks a lot about how you can list all of those gratitudes out, and it helps open your eyes up to being able to see the way in which God is present with us. But in the book, she also reflects on the hard things. She says in a chapter where she's talking about a really difficult season in her life that she has I have hacked my life up into grace moments and curse moments. Have you ever felt that way? Where you feel like you have these moments where you're super thankful for all that God has done for you. And then you have these moments where you are wondering, crying out, where is God? These grace moments and these curse moments. Well, we saw those moments in the lives of Naomi and Ruth as they journeyed through their hard times. Naomi becoming bitter towards God, even changing her name or her identity in God. And yet, God still provided. But it was only in these review mirror ways that she could see that God was providing for her. There's a story about a family who was going across a bridge for the very first time. And they were really worried about the bridge, if it would hold their car, especially the little girl that was riding there. She could not understand how this bridge, whatever a bridge was, would help her get across this expansive river. And so as they drove near and near and near, and her parents tried to reassure her that the bridge builders had built the bridge, and they would not go into the water, she became more and more anxious because she just couldn't see. She couldn't see the bridge. She couldn't see how they were going to be able to go across safely. And in those moments where they finally were on the bridge, she held her breath until they got across the bridge. And it was in the rearview mirror that she could see that bridge that was there all along had held her from that one shore into the next. That's kind of how our faith is. Our faith is one of those rearview mirror ways in which we look back and see the ways in which God has held us from one space into the next. We know that life is not all joy, right? That life is not all beautiful things. But in her book, Anne Voskamp writes that suffering nourishes grace, and pain and joy are arteries of the same heart, and mourning and dancing are but movements in his unfinished symphony of beauty. All is grace. God is always good, and I am always loved. One of my friends shared with me this talk that I've seen several times, and I love it. It's between Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper. And Stephen Colbert lost a big portion of his family when he was little in a plane crash. And so he was reflecting on grace and God's goodness and love, even in the midst of the tragedy. And Anderson Cooper asked if Stephen Colbert was thankful thankful for all that had happened in his life, including this tragic accident. And Stephen Colbert sits there for a minute and he reflects and he says, yes, I am. Well, Anderson Cooper can't understand that. And he asks them, how can that be? How can you be thankful for the bad times as well as the good? And Stephen Colbert says, because everything is a gift. Life is a gift. And if we are going to love is a gift. And if we're going to love, then that means we will lose. But it is all a gift. And when we lose somebody, there's that pain and sorrow, but it is a gift because we loved them and we miss them. That's a really hard thing to sit with, and yet it is the truth of who we are as a faithful people. We recognize that life is a gift, that everything that we have is a gift before us, and that God gives to us in the midst of those hard times, love and grace that carries us from one moment into the next. So how do you count on life when the hopes don't add up? She writes that the hopes don't have to add up, but God is always present with us. Can God be counted on? Yes. Count the blessings and find out how many of God's bridges have already held you in those hard times. Well, we're entering into that season of darkness. Have you noticed as you look outside my window, it is 4:30 on a Monday afternoon and it is dark. Now, some of that's because of the clouds, but it is going to be dark here in less than an hour. It's a season in which the darkness begins to creep in, and I have a really hard time with that. So I have to put on a whole bunch of different lights. And when you turn on a light, it illuminates things, right? But because I haven't had this light on, I'm seeing this circle around my eyes. It's almost blinding. Well, Barbara Brown Taylor reminds us in Learning to Walk in the Dark that there is blessing in those dark times of our lives. There's blessing in the darkness. See, many of us are afraid of the dark. We're afraid of what life might be, how hard it might be, how we might not be able to survive the darkness. And yet when the light goes out, we realize that there's a blessing in that. There's a blessing of having to move slower through life, having to maybe open ourselves up in new ways, feel around for those things that we count on to be there, and also those things that we don't quite expect. And when there is darkness, like in the night sky, we see things that we don't see during the daytime. We see these beautiful stars. We see the planets that are around us. We sometimes see those shooting stars, those little meteors. And it opens up our senses into the ways in which there is goodness and grace even in those dark times. So maybe this is a season in which we open ourselves up. We learn to walk in the darkness. We learn to move about, to slow down, and to let a little bit of light creep into our lives that can become even brighter and brighter as we begin to see the goodness of God, the faithfulness of God. And then maybe that light can start to light up our world around us. Maybe we have a neighbor or a friend who doesn't feel like that there is light in their life, but they see that little flame in yours. They see that little glimmer of hope, and they recognize that that light is carrying them through their darkness. And maybe at one point later in the future, they can grab onto a little bit of that flame in their life, and then that light begins to build and grow. So as we enter into this week of Thanksgiving, be thankful for the gifts that God has given to you, those blessings that you are obviously able to see and experience, like family around a table, like delicious foods, like a warm home when it is cold outside. but also try to look for ways in which God has been faithful to you in those hard times as well. How God has built bridges from one side of a hard time into a safer space for you. Begin to slow down in that dark time and look for the light and the beauty that is around you. And as we move into this Advent season, may it be a season of waiting, of anticipation, of excitement and wonder, but also may it be a time of darkness in which you can slow down and really focus on the light of Christ that guides us through our lives. And may your flame burn even just a little bit so that your neighbors, your friends, your family members, that they can see that flame, and it can be an invitation to them this season into the love and grace of God that has always been there for them, just as it is for you. Amen.